Imagine being completely alone on the open ocean for over 4 months, with nothing but a small life raft and your own ingenuity to keep you alive. Imagine watching 52 of your shipmates disappear beneath the waves after a Nazi torpedo rips your vessel apart. Now imagine not just surviving, but thriving, creating fishing tools from scraps, outsmarting sharks, and maintaining your sanity when most people would have gone insane in weeks. This is not a Hollywood movie. This is the incredible true story of Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor who survived 133 days alone at sea, a world record that has never been broken and likely never will be. Could you survive 4.5 months alone in the ocean with nothing but your intelligence and will to live? Stay with us, because what this man accomplished defies every rule of human survival. In the bustling port city of Hainan, China, in 1918, Poon Lim was born into a world where survival meant making impossible choices. His family lived in grinding poverty, watching Japanese forces slowly consume their homeland while economic desperation drove young men to seek their fortunes far from home. The Pearl River that flowed past their modest dwelling carried ships from around the world, and young Poon Lim would spend hours watching these vessels, dreaming of escape from a life that offered little hope. By the time he reached his early 20s, Poon Lim had made a decision that would literally save his life years later. Instead of following family tradition and becoming a farmer or factory worker, he chose the dangerous but potentially lucrative life of a merchant sailor. The decision horrified his parents, who knew that Chinese sailors faced discrimination, dangerous working conditions, and the constant threat of being stranded in foreign ports with no protection. But Poon Lim possessed something that set him apart from other young men seeking maritime work, an almost supernatural ability to learn and adapt. Within months of his first voyage, he had mastered navigation techniques, weather prediction, and most importantly, the art of making something from nothing. Senior sailors noticed his talent for improvisation, his calm demeanor in crisis situations, and his uncanny ability to find solutions when others saw only problems. In 1942, as World War II raged across the globe, Poon Lim secured a position as second steward aboard the SS Ben Lomond, a British merchant vessel carrying vital supplies between South America and Britain. It was considered one of the most dangerous routes in the world, with German U-boats prowling the Atlantic like underwater wolves, hunting for exactly the type of vessel Poon Lim now called home. The SS Ben Lomond was a floating community of 53 men from dozens of countries, united by the dangerous work of keeping supply lines open during wartime. Captain John Proudfoot ran a tight ship, but he also understood that his crew faced death every day they remained at sea. German submarine commanders had orders to sink merchant vessels without warning, and the survival rate for torpedoed ships was terrifyingly low. Poon Lim quickly earned respect among his diverse crewmates for his work ethic, his unusual calmness under pressure, and his talent for solving practical problems that stumped more experienced sailors. Little did anyone know that these exact qualities would soon be tested in ways no human should ever have to endure. On November 23, 1942, as the SS Ben Lomond steamed through the South Atlantic, carrying a cargo of military supplies, Poon Lim was performing his routine duties, unaware that German submarine U-172 was tracking their movements through its periscope. The war had come to find them, and within hours, Poon Lim's life would be changed forever. The morning started like any other aboard the SS Ben Lomond. Poon Lim was in the ship's galley, preparing breakfast for the crew, when he felt the deck vibrate slightly beneath his feet. As an experienced sailor, he immediately recognized the sound. It wasn't the normal engine vibration or wave impact. It was something else, something that made every instinct scream danger. At exactly 11:45 a.m., the torpedo from German submarine U-172 struck the SS Ben Lomond amidships with devastating force. The explosion was so powerful that it lifted men off their feet and threw them against bulkheads like rag dolls. The ship's hull split open like a broken egg, and the South Atlantic began pouring in with terrifying speed. Poon Lim later described those first moments as surreal: the sound of twisting metal, the screams of injured men, the awful realization that their floating home was dying beneath them. Training took over as the crew rushed to launch lifeboats, but the ship was sinking so rapidly that most emergency equipment became unreachable. Within minutes, the SS Benlamon's deck was tilting at impossible angles. In the chaos, Poon Lim made a decision that saved his life. Instead of fighting with other crew members for space in the overcrowded lifeboats, he grabbed a life jacket and dove directly into the freezing Atlantic water. It was a calculated risk. The lifeboats offered better immediate protection, but they were also becoming death traps as panicked men fought for space in vessels designed for far fewer passengers. As he surfaced in the oil-slicked water, Poon Lim watched his ship slide beneath the waves, taking most of his crewmates with it. The few lifeboats that had managed to launch were quickly disappearing in the distance, carried away by currents and wind. The German submarine had already vanished, leaving behind only debris, oil, and the dying screams of men who would never see home again. For 2 hours, Poon Lim floated alone in water so cold, it felt like liquid knives cutting into his skin. Hypothermia was beginning to cloud his thinking when he spotted something that seemed like a miracle. A single life raft floating among the wreckage. Using techniques learned during his years at sea, he managed to swim to the raft and pull himself aboard. The life raft was a standard British Navy emergency craft, designed to keep shipwreck survivors alive for perhaps 2 weeks while awaiting rescue. It contained basic supplies: some hardtack biscuits, a few cans of water, emergency flares, a canvas covering for protection from sun and rain, and simple fishing equipment consisting of hooks and line. For any normal rescue scenario, it was adequate. For what Poon Lim was about to endure, it was pitifully insufficient. As night fell on November 23, 1942, Poon Lim found himself completely alone on an ocean that stretched endlessly in every direction. 52 of his shipmates were dead. He was hundreds of miles from the nearest land, and he had no way to signal for help. Most men would have given up hope within days. Poon Lim was just getting started. What do you think about Poon Lim's decision to jump directly into the water instead of fighting for space in the lifeboats? Was it brilliant survival instinct or just incredible luck? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in that terrifying moment. The first week alone on the life raft nearly broke Poon Lim's spirit completely. The enormity of his situation struck him with crushing force. He was one man on an infinite ocean, with supplies that might last 2 weeks if carefully rationed. The psychological impact was almost worse than the physical challenges. The silence was absolute, except for the constant slapping of waves against the raft, a sound that became a torturous metronome marking each passing hour. Poon Lim's survival training from his merchant marine days had taught him the basics of water rationing and emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared him for the mental warfare of complete isolation. He found himself talking to imaginary companions, having full conversations with seabirds that landed briefly on his raft, and sometimes forgetting for hours at a time why he was floating alone in the middle of nowhere. Thank you so much for staying with us this far. Your engagement means everything to us. And I promise you, the most incredible part of this story is still to come. But Poon Lim possessed something that most people lack: an almost supernatural ability to adapt and innovate under extreme pressure. Instead of dwelling on his desperate situation, he began to systematically analyze every aspect of his environment and equipment, looking for ways to extend his survival indefinitely. The water situation was critical. His emergency supply would last perhaps 10 days with careful rationing, but he needed to create a sustainable source. Using the canvas covering from his raft, Poon Lim designed an ingenious rainwater collection system. He positioned the canvas to channel even the smallest amounts of precipitation into his water containers, and learned to predict weather patterns by observing cloud formations and wind directions. Food presented an even greater challenge. The hardtack biscuits were gone within the first week, and the basic fishing equipment included in the raft was designed for emergencies, not long-term survival. This is where Poon Lim's mechanical ingenuity truly shone. He discovered that the life raft's emergency flashlight contained small springs that could be carefully extracted and reshaped into fishing hooks. Using threads pulled from his own clothing, he created stronger fishing lines than the basic equipment provided. His first successful catch was a small fish that he ate raw, having no way to create fire on the raft. The taste was revolting, but it represented something more important than nutrition. It was proof that he could actively hunt for his survival rather than simply rationing emergency supplies until they ran out. The loneliness, however, remained his greatest enemy. Poon Lim later described periods of several days where he couldn't remember speaking aloud, followed by manic episodes where he would sing Chinese folk songs for hours just to hear a human voice. He developed elaborate mental exercises, reciting the names of every person he'd ever known, planning detailed menus for meals he would cook when rescued, and designing the house he would build back in China. Ships passed in the distance on 3 separate occasions during his first month at sea. Each time, Poon Lim used his emergency flares and waved frantically, but the vessels were too far away to spot a single man on a small raft. The psychological impact of these near misses was devastating. Hope followed by crushing disappointment that left him staring at the ocean for days in numb despair. But each failure taught him something new about survival. He began to understand ocean currents, learning to position his raft in shipping lanes where rescue was more likely. He studied the behavior of seabirds, discovering that certain species indicated land or fishing grounds nearby. Most importantly, he began to see the ocean not as his enemy, but as a complex ecosystem that he could learn to navigate and exploit. By the end of his first month alone, Poon Lim had transformed from a shipwreck victim waiting for rescue into something entirely different. A master of oceanic survival who was actively hunting, fishing, and thriving in an environment that should have killed him weeks earlier. By his second month alone on the life raft, Poon Lim had achieved something that survival experts still consider impossible. He had not only adapted to life on the open ocean, but had actually begun to thrive. His daily routine had evolved into a sophisticated survival system that would later be studied by military survival schools around the world. The improvised hooks made from flashlight springs proved so effective that he was catching enough fish not just to survive, but to build up small reserves of food. He learned to identify which species were safe to eat raw and which might be dangerous. More importantly, he discovered that fish blood and fluids could supplement his water supply during periods when rain was scarce. But Poon Lim's greatest innovation was his method for catching seabirds. Using fish as bait and employing patience that bordered on the supernatural, he would wait motionless for hours until hungry birds landed on his raft. His technique for catching them bare-handed became so refined that he rarely missed, and bird meat provided crucial proteins and fats that fish alone couldn't supply. The mental challenges of months-long isolation would have driven most people to complete madness, but Poon Lim developed psychological coping mechanisms that were as sophisticated as his survival techniques. He created detailed daily schedules that gave structure to endless days. He designated specific times for fishing, equipment maintenance, physical exercise, and mental activities. This routine became his anchor to sanity. Perhaps most remarkably, he began to view his situation not as a disaster to be endured, but as a challenge to be mastered. He experimented with different fishing techniques, improved his rainwater collection system, and even began to enjoy certain aspects of his oceanic solitude. He later described periods of genuine contentment, watching sunsets over the infinite water, and feeling a strange peace that he had never experienced in his previous life. The ocean revealed its moods to him in ways that no textbook could teach. He learned to read weather patterns days in advance, understanding which cloud formations meant rain, which wind directions brought warmer temperatures, and how ocean swells indicated distant storms. This knowledge allowed him to prepare for challenges before they arrived, and position his raft for maximum survival advantage. Sharks became a constant presence around his raft, attracted by fish scraps and the scent of his activities. Rather than fear them, Poon Lim learned to coexist with these predators. He discovered which species were merely curious and which represented genuine threats. On several occasions, he actually managed to catch small sharks using reinforced lines, providing meat that could sustain him for days. His physical condition, remarkably, remained relatively stable despite months of survival conditions. His careful rationing of food and water, combined with the physical activity required for fishing and raft maintenance, kept him functional when most shipwreck victims would have wasted away. His skin darkened and toughened from constant sun exposure, and his body adapted to sleeping on the hard raft surface. But it was his mental resilience that truly set Poon Lim apart from other survival stories. He never lost hope of eventual rescue, but he also never became dependent on that hope for his daily motivation. Instead, he developed a mindset focused on continuous improvement of his situation, treating each day as an opportunity to become more skilled at oceanic survival. 3 more ships passed within sight during his second and third months at sea, but by this time, Poon Lim had learned not to pin all his hopes on immediate rescue. Each sighting was noted and analyzed, adding to his understanding of shipping patterns, but no longer causing the emotional devastation of his earlier failed rescue attempts. As he approached his 100th day alone on the ocean, Poon Lim had become something unprecedented in maritime history. A human being who had successfully adapted to permanent life at sea, using nothing but his intelligence, determination, and an almost supernatural ability to innovate under impossible circumstances. On April 5, 1943, after 133 days alone on the South Atlantic, Poon Lim was no longer the same man who had jumped from the sinking SS Benjamin. His skin was deeply tanned and weathered, his body lean but surprisingly strong, and his eyes held a calm confidence that came from having mastered one of Earth's most hostile environments. He was conducting his morning fishing routine when he spotted something different on the horizon. Not another distant ship that would disappear, but 3 small fishing boats heading directly toward his position. The Brazilian fishermen who found him later described their shock at discovering a man who had been alone at sea for over 4 months, yet appeared alert, coherent, and in remarkably good physical condition. They expected to find a dying castaway, but instead encountered someone who calmly explained his situation in broken Portuguese, mixed with English and Chinese, helped secure his raft to their boat, and even offered to share some of his dried fish supplies. The rescue itself was almost anticlimactic after the epic survival story that preceded it. The fishermen, Jaime Teixeira, Jose Pereira, and Antonio Silva, were working their nets about 40 miles off the Brazilian coast, near the mouth of the Amazon River, when they spotted what they initially thought was debris floating in the water. As they approached, they realized it was a life raft with a lone occupant who was waving calmly at them rather than frantically signaling for help. Poon Lim's first words to his rescuers were reportedly a polite inquiry about whether they had any cigarettes, followed by questions about the current date and the progress of the war. His mental clarity after 133 days of isolation astonished the fishermen, who had expected to find either a corpse or a man driven insane by months of solitude. The boat trip to the Brazilian port of Belém took 6 hours, during which Poon Lim amazed his rescuers by demonstrating some of the survival techniques he had developed. He showed them his improvised fishing hooks, explained his rainwater collection system, and even prepared a meal using methods he had perfected during his oceanic ordeal. The fisherman later said it was like being taught survival skills by someone who had become a master of living at sea. News of Poon Lim's rescue spread around the world with lightning speed. In the middle of World War II, when newspapers were filled with stories of death and destruction, here was an almost miraculous tale of human resilience and ingenuity. The fact that he had not only survived, but had actually thrived for over 4 months alone at sea, captured imaginations everywhere. Medical examinations in Belém revealed that Poon Lim was in surprisingly good health for someone who had endured such an ordeal. He had lost significant weight, but was not malnourished, showed no signs of serious sun damage despite months of exposure, and most remarkably, displayed no symptoms of the psychological trauma that typically affects long-term isolation survivors. The British Navy, eager to learn from his experience, flew Poon Lim to Britain for extensive debriefings. Military survival experts spent weeks interviewing him, documenting his techniques, and incorporating his innovations into official survival training programs. His improvised fishing methods, rainwater collection systems, and psychological coping strategies became standard elements of naval survival manuals. King George VI personally awarded Poon Lim the British Empire Medal, making him one of the few Chinese nationals to receive such recognition during World War II. The citation praised not just his survival, but his ingenuity and determination that had turned a hopeless situation into a masterclass in human adaptability. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from the Guinness Book of World Records, which officially recognized Poon Lim's 133 days alone at sea as the longest survival time on a life raft, a record that stands to this day, and given modern shipping and communication systems will likely never be broken. After the war, Poon Lim eventually immigrated to the United States, where he lived quietly until his death in 1991. He rarely spoke publicly about his ordeal, preferring to let his achievement speak for itself. When asked about the secret to his survival, he would simply say that he never gave up hope and never stopped trying to improve his situation, no matter how impossible it seemed. So what do you think made Poon Lim's survival possible? Was it his technical ingenuity, his mental toughness, or something deeper? An almost supernatural ability to adapt to impossible circumstances. Could you maintain hope and sanity for over 4 months alone on the endless ocean, with nothing but your own resourcefulness to keep you alive? This story challenges everything we think we know about human limitations. In an age of GPS tracking, satellite communication, and rapid rescue systems, it's almost impossible to imagine being so completely alone and dependent on your own skills for survival. Yet Poon Lim not only survived, he thrived, creating a sustainable life in one of Earth's most hostile environments. Let us know in the comments what aspect of his survival story impressed you most. Was it his fishing innovations, his psychological resilience, or his ability to see opportunity where others would see only hopeless disaster? If this incredible story of human endurance and ingenuity amazed you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most remarkable true stories of courage, survival, and the unbreakable human spirit every week. And don't miss our next video, where we'll explore another survival story that defies belief. The tale of a family that survived a plane crash in the Amazon rainforest and had to trek through one of the world's most dangerous jungles to reach civilization. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Until next time, remember that the human capacity for survival and adaptation goes far beyond what we think is possible.